Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
The story.
It just felt like I was never going to reach a solution to what was going on with me. And mind you too, Eric, in that time, in that 6 months before I was incarcerated, there was no light at the end of the tunnel for me, and life was very grim. And I was watching so many people be hurt through my actions that I didn't want to live with myself anymore.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colfax. Welcome to The Story. In 2019, while Mel Wells was in prison, her life completely changed when she put her faith in Jesus. Also, she had a vision of how she could help other women when they were released from jail, and that is exactly what she's doing today. We'll find out how God helped her make that vision a reality as Mel shares her story with us. And parents, before we get started, we just want to mention that due to some of the adult topics that will be discussed, today's program is not recommended for young children. Mel Wells is chatting with Eric Scatterbo.
Mel Wells, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Eric.
Glad to have you with us. And where are you joining us from today?
I'm up in the Lismore area today, in the home of the program that I've started, like for Desert Road.
That's right. The ministry you started is called Desert Road. So that's where you are right now?
Yeah, that's correct. Beautiful day up here today.
Okay, and we're going to find out how the Lord worked in your life to reach the point where you are now sitting, where you are doing what you're doing today. So that's all coming up in this conversation. But right now, we want to start off talking about where it all began. Where were you born and raised?
Yeah, I was raised in Sydney's West, in the Cabramatta area, with myself. I've got a brother that's 9 years older than me, and my mum and dad. And tell us, what was your childhood like? My childhood was pretty normal to an extent. My dad ran a rugby league club, so a lot of our time was spent at the football, especially in the winter time. So I grew up with quite a lot of male role models, which wasn't a bad thing, but played a lot of sport as a child, especially with my older brother. He enjoyed sport as well. And yeah, just the normal childhood that kids get to experience.
But unfortunately, some trauma in your childhood?
Yeah, from the age of between 4 and 10, I was abused as a child by two different men.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, back then, things were a bit different for my family, along with other families, I'm sure, where instead of dealing with the issue head on, we sort of swept it under the carpet and didn't really want to deal with it and pretended like it didn't happen. So as much as, mum and dad thought at the time that wasn't probably a bad choice, as I've got older in my teens and early adult years, it turned out that, it was obviously one of the biggest impacts on who I became as I grew up.
And what would you say were the lasting impacts of that trauma?
I think today, looking back, I've had a lot of psychological help. So I can see that it's hard to explain, in a sense that when you compress things and you don't deal with them, it doesn't go away for you. It stays there, and it boils up into a point where different things can happen to that person, and it causes different sorts of trauma and just ways of life that they look and they experience things. And unfortunately for me, becoming an early teen and growing up, it caused a lot of hassle for me, in the fact that I became a compulsive liar. And I would lie about little things all the time, Eric. Like, someone would say, "Oh, do you like that?" And I'd say no, and I really did. And, at first I realised that things were going on that didn't make sense to me, but I just, brushed it under the carpet like everything else and thought, it'll be fine.
So what you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that you never received any counseling or talked with anybody about the abuse that you went through?
I think I did once,
Okay.
And it was after the second abuse because the second abuse actually went through the courts,
Okay.
where the first one didn't. But yeah, so I think it was something that had to be done, where I went and seen somebody and spoke about it. But I don't have much recollection of it. And when I do speak about it to like family members, especially when I did raise it with my mum and dad, my mum did tell me a while back. She said, "No, you wouldn't talk. Like you didn't want to talk about it." And,
okay.
And they couldn't get anywhere with you. So that was it. and
Okay.
they decided, let's just move on with life.
Now, I've heard that sometimes when you have trauma in your life and it's not dealt with, it's kind of like trying to push a beach ball down underneath the water. You can hold it down for so long, but eventually it pops up again. And is that kind of what you're saying happened to you as far as it manifested itself in this compulsive lying?
Yeah, for sure. And I think if we look at the size of a beach ball, I think it's safe to say mine definitely manifested and probably was the size of 5 or 10 because of the pushing down and not knowing how to deal with it and not having the right tools to do so either.
Yeah, interesting that lying was the way it manifested itself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was more of being approved.
Wanting to be approved.
Wanting approval for everything, wanting attention.
Okay.
Just feeling wanted or needed or valued, maybe.
Okay.
And I think the abuse from both sides of what had happened was a thing where I obviously didn't feel that, or that was taken away from me as a child. And that was how my mind decided that, that to make that up and to be loved and valued. And that was the only way that in my head I could see that was ever going to happen.
Oh, I see. Okay. And also this impacted your mother as well?
Yeah. After, like in my early teens, I noticed that my mum had a bit of a drinking problem and she was an alcoholic, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, that didn't change for her, sadly. And, mum made a few mistakes in her life with the way she treated people and she lied about a few things herself. But I think that was out of a guilt more than anything for maybe not doing the right thing towards me with the situation.
So she felt guilty about what happened to you?
Yeah, definitely. She carried a lot of that guilt with her. And it was the pain relief for her was alcohol.
Okay. So the picture you're painting here, a lot of confusion and undealt with trauma. Then going into your teenage years, you become pregnant at 16?
Yeah, correct. I had my first child just after I turned 17, so I was pregnant at 16. He'll be 24 this year.
Okay.
So so I had him and then moved on to, I never really had a relationship with his father.
Would you say that was part of the whole seeking approval?
Yeah, definitely.
Or finding love in all the wrong places is another term commonly used?
Yeah. And that continued.
Oh, okay.
It didn't get better anytime soon for me. So I jumped into another relationship and then 3 years later had another child. And that relationship became a bit of a domestic violent relationship, but we got married. I remember, I think it was 6 weeks before we actually got married that he'd been out on the drink all night and he came home and I think I questioned where he'd been and he belted me and he'd actually hit me so bad he'd fractured my cheekbone.
Oh, wow.
6 weeks before we got married, but I married him anyway because we had our child and I'd already had my older boy and I was just trying to do the right thing is what I thought I was doing. So that didn't last long. I think we got married and then we were separated 12 months later. I'd actually left him because I just couldn't do it anymore and jumped straight back into another relationship.
Then what happened to lead you to going to prison?
So with the relationship I was having, I had moved up to northern New South Wales from Sydney. We'd had a daughter and when we moved up here, we had another child. And I'd noticed in that time that looking back now, you can see different patterns of the lying got worse. And anyway, him and I separated and I got into another relationship probably 12 months after that. And life seemed to be normal. I was working for a big sporting organisation where I was travelling to Sydney quite often, and I had big groups of friends and family. And on the outside picture, it was painted perfectly, but the inside of me, the compulsive lying actually got worse to the point where I thought I was rather ill. I had a terminal illness. I even had the side effects of the terminal illness that obviously happens when people's bodies react and think that that's what's going on with them.
So you actually believed that you were ill when you weren't?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. I showed all the effects of it. I was, going to doctors and sitting in waiting rooms waiting for people to see me and things like that. So I was totally delusional. So, so it was what they call the dissociative identity disorder was what I was told that I had later on after this all came to light. So it was an interesting time, and people raised money for me to have treatment, and I went overseas to have this treatment, and there was actually footage of me sitting in hospitals and things like that in America, waiting to see doctors and stuff like that. So there was something definitely not right. Like I believed, and everybody around me believed I was generally sick, but real thing was that no, it wasn't happening. I was unwell, but just not with what I thought.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Eric Scatterbo is chatting with Mel Wells, who was abused as a child and was later told she had a dissociative identity disorder. This is sometimes also referred to as a multiple personality disorder. We'll find out how her compulsive lying eventually leads her to prison. That's all coming up when we return.
The Story. If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colfax, and this is The Story. We're back with more of Mel Wells sharing her life journey. Before the break, we heard how the trauma of childhood abuse led Mel to become a compulsive liar, as she was constantly seeking approval. Also, she eventually convinced herself that she had a serious illness and was raising funds to pay for her unneeded medical treatment. Next, we'll find out how this leads to her serving time in prison, as she continues her chat with Eric Scatterbo.
So the sickness that came about was more or less psychological, not an actual sickness. Correct.
Yeah.
So you had so much convinced yourself that you were sick that it manifested itself, there's that word again, in some type of illness or health problems.
Correct. Yep.
And so how did that situation, which of course is unhealthy in many, many ways, how did that eventually lead to prison?
So because money was raised to help me go overseas and stuff like that, obviously it was a fraudulent matter because I wasn't really sick.
Right.
And it had come to light through the organisation I was working with. Some things didn't add up for them apparently, and they, went searching for what was going on. And then when they obviously found out what was happening, they referred it to be a criminal matter. So in 2018, I had detectives knock on my door and asked me a couple of questions. And while I sat there very confused about the whole thing going, this isn't what's going on. And, I also had a part of me going, it was like a weight was lifted out of me, saying, okay, this is not real and this needs fixing. Like how does Mel fix this? So it was a confusing time for me.
Yeah.
When I was charged, and because
Now, did you think you were innocent because in your mind you really were ill?
Yes and no. Like I was very confused, Eric. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a part of me going, yeah, this is right. Like, you've lied about this.
Oh, okay. So your conscience did bother you a bit.
Yeah. The dissociative thing comes into it there, and it's just like, it was like I think one of the ways best to describe a dissociative disorder is you've got two brains in your head, I suppose. Like it's two different people in your mind. Mm-hmm. And that's the best way to probably describe it.
So one is quite aware that this is a deception.
Correct. And the other one is going ahead with it and fighting it and saying, no, this is really what's going on and this is okay. And,
that's fascinating.
Yeah. So while it was very confusing for me, because I often, when you talk to people that knew me back then that were very close to me, they would actually say to me that often they would see me or hear me talking to myself. And I would be like, well, why would I be doing that? Or what was I saying? And they'll be like, oh, I don't know. But often we would see that or hear that of you. And, people would laugh and joke it off because, often sometimes we do that,
Yeah.
I think there's like a bit of a meme that goes around and says the best person to get advice from, or if you hear me speaking, I'm speaking to myself, it's just what some people do at times.
Yeah.
But I did it more than normal. Apparently, and that was one of the signs of the dissociative disorder.
So ultimately, you were caught in a lie.
Correct.
Which was
correct.
A crime, fraud.
Yeah. So because of my job description previously with the sporting organisation and growing up, I played a bit of representative sport.
Mm-hmm.
I was quite known in the area. It hit the media, and it hit the media very heavily, which then caused a lot of backlash, not just for me, but for my now husband and for my kids. And being in a small town, there was a lot of hate. There was a lot of things that went on that probably shouldn't have gone on. I was harassed, which, I can understand why people were angry.
They thought that they gave money to help you get cured.
Yeah.
And then they find
exactly.
out you weren't sick. So
exactly right.
Yeah.
And my husband lost most of his family and friends because of it, because it was, the whole, oh, did you know about it, or were you in on it, or why would you support her now? My kids were bullied at school. There was parents that wouldn't let their kids play with my kids, and it got really ugly. It got nasty. And it was a hard time for a lot of people.
And then after going through all that, you're in prison.
Correct. So the day before my son turned 18, I was sentenced to 3 years, but 10 months inside prison.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was in a holding cell for, I think it was about 5 days before I was taken to the local prison. But there was an interesting situation. So where they had the women housed at this prison was actually in a men's section. So there was one cell with 6 women, and every other cell around them was housed with men. And they were the sort of men that they were in there for things similar to what I had faced as a child.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, most of the women got moved on, and after a week I was actually in this cell on my own. And because the men knew I was in there, when they were allowed outside their cells, they were putting letters and yelling things out to me at the door. So it was quite horrific for me to be in that.
So this is stirring up all of the abuse issues from your childhood.
Yeah, definitely. And still not knowing what was actually going on with me, it was really hard. It was a really hard time.
Oh, you didn't really understand this whole dissociative personality disorder thing and all that at the time?
No. I was thrown from 5 or 6 different doctors in the 6 months, trying to get answers for the court, trying to get answers for us. And it just felt like I was never going to reach a solution to what was going on with me. And mind you too, Eric, in that time, in that 6 months before I was incarcerated, I'd tried to take my life a couple of times because I couldn't deal with it. That it was just too much for my head to deal with, and there was no light at the end of the tunnel for me, and life was very grim, and I was watching so many people be hurt through my actions that I didn't want to live with myself anymore.
Well, let's find out how things change around. It's pretty bleak at this point.
Yeah, correct. So I was moved from that prison to the mid-North Coast, and unfortunately things didn't get better to start with. I was badly assaulted in the other prison because I'd never been involved with drugs or alcohol really, or never been involved with drugs. And at that time that I was in this prison, there was a big drug ring happening. And because I didn't want to be a part of it and I voiced that, I copped a flogging for it. So I spent a couple of days in a hospital with some broken cheekbones and black eyes and all the rest of it. So I was actually moved to a prison in Sydney after that. So things turned around for me in March 2019 when I arrived at Emu Plains, and a day or two after I'd been there, one of chaplains there. He was a male chaplain. He came out and he asked to see me. And I went inside and sat with this man, and everyone called him Chappie at the prison.
Yep.
And I don't know, I felt there was some sort of a warmth towards him. And it was something that I just couldn't explain at the time, but I knew there was something there. And it was like, okay, what's going on here? Something's changing in me. So over time, over a couple of weeks, I met with him a few times, and he asked me different things, like, have I ever read the Bible and things like that? And I was like, nah, never read it. You know, I think I'd only ever been to church once to a service, and other than that, I'd been to a christening or two. But that was the only ever connection I had with God. Like I didn't know anything about Christianity or anything to do with it at all.
Mm-hmm.
So he invited me to go to a Kairos course. They had Kairos every Wednesday, where a group of women would come inside and meet with us, and we'd sing some songs and we'd read the Bible and have a cup of tea with them. I remember
what is a Kairos course?
So Kairos is an organisation that goes into the prisons. They're actually worldwide. That started off in America, and we have it here in Australia. So they have a Kairos inside and they have Kairos outside. So the inside are obviously for the people that are in prison, and the Kairos outside are support for people that have people or know people that are in prison. So it's a really good ministry that takes part in prisons worldwide. So I started attending this on a Wednesday afternoon, and I'll never forget it, Eric. I walked out the first week I was there, and I went, as lovely as them ladies were and as good as it was, I walked out and in my head went, yeah, nah, not for me.
Okay.
I wasn't going back.
Yeah.
But the following Wednesday, guess who was sitting in the visits area?
Oh,
it was
you had a change of
me
heart.
again. I went back. Yeah. Yeah, I think, looking back at it now, we know that, Jesus obviously played a part in that and had me go back there. And I started to enjoy it, and I started to connect with the women that came in. And then Chappie had said to me they have this thing called a short course in May. And what it is that the women come in for 4 days straight, and we sit down and we learn about God, and we do different things of worship. And it just, it sounded interesting. And I was like, okay, I'm open to learning a bit more. So why not do it? 4 days with these ladies is better than 4 days sitting out in the compound or in a prison cell. So in that time as well, because the chaplain's office was directly across the door from the psychologist's office, and I'd said to Bernard, the chaplain, I said, look, I really need to see somebody. I really need to sort out whatever's going on in my head, and I need help. And he had actually pushed for me to see the psychologist there, and I started doing weekly visits with her as well, trying to unpack everything that was going on in my head. So anyway, we went to the Kairos short course in May. Now, mind you, I still didn't believe. I didn't know what to believe and what this all was. And it was the second day that we were there. It was the 22nd of May. And what these ladies had us done on this day was we had dissolvable paper. And on that paper for that day, it was all about forgiveness. And we had to talk about forgiveness. And then on this paper, we went on our own and we had to write a list of people that we had to forgive. And on that list, I wrote, I think 6 or 7 people, maybe more. But I remember my name was the very first name, because I'd learnt in that time with them women that for me to move forward in life, the first thing I needed to do was to forgive myself. And that was something that I really struggled with because of the people I'd hurt that were around me.
Yeah.
So I did. I wrote my name, and then I wrote the abusers' names and a few other names. And then we sat in a little chapel service that we had, and they had worship music in the background, and we had holy water, and we had to go up and pray over the paper, and then we put the paper in, which dissolved in the holy water. And it was at that time that I felt Jesus literally lift this massive burden out of my body as I watched that paper dissolve in that holy water. And that was a game changer for me.
Well, that was part one of Eric Scatterbo's conversation with Mel Wells. And it was great to hear how Jesus lifted a massive burden from her. As the Bible says, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Also, it was great to hear how Mel was ministered to by ladies from Cairo's prison ministry and the prison chaplain. Cairo's exist to help those impacted by incarceration through the love, hope and faith found in Jesus Christ. For more information, their website is kairos.org.au. Once again, that's Kairos, Kairos.org.au. Well, we'll invite you to join us again next time to hear more of Mel Wells' amazing story of transformation and how she goes on to start her own ministry to help other women when they're released from jail. That's all coming up next time. Until then, I'm Jimmy Colfax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Next time on The Story.
The day I left prison and I walked out the gates, it was like God had just thrown something at me. And he was saying to me that my time with women in prison wasn't done. And I remember being petrified when I heard that from him, because there was no way in the world I was going back inside them gates, Eric.
Mel Wells joins us once again to share how God set her free while in prison. Also, she'll share about her vision to help other women when they're released from jail. We'll find out how God helped her make that vision a reality next time.
The Story. Just another way Vision is helping you look to God daily.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.